Hi, this is David Unsworth, English editor of the Pan Am Post. Today we'll be speaking with Dr. Eric Graf. He holds a PhD in Spanish literature from the University of Virginia. He is an expert on medieval and early modern Spain. He's taught at William & Mary, the University of Chicago, and the University of Virginia, among others, and currently is a professor of Latin American and Renaissance Studies at the University of Francisco Marroquin in Guatemala. Eric, thank you so much for being with us today.
Terrific. Thank you, David.
So in addition to the Spanish and Latin American literature, you also deal with economic and political theory, and you are a Houston resident. Is that correct?
I grew up in Houston.
Okay, Houston.
So I'm actually a resident of Guatemala at present. I teach at the University of Francisco Marroquin, and yes, let's say I'm a student of economics and politics, but yeah, my specialty is in literature. But like all literary academics, I feel I am qualified to comment on just about anything under the sun.
Absolutely anything from astrophysics to microbiology to...
Right. There you go.
I love it, to astrology. So the media, as they always do, is overlaying their own narrative that with regard to the Harvey situation that may or may not be accurate. You have an interesting take on this, and to begin with, one of the things you've pointed out is that charity is now its own industry. You've specifically referred to it as the charity governmental agency complex. What do you mean by that?
Well, I'm referring to Eisenhower's famous military-industrial complex, right? He warned, I don't know if it was Kennedy or some future staffer, about the military-industrial complex. Beware the military-industrial complex. And in the United States today, somebody needs to say beware the charity governmental agency complex, because that's what this is. This is a hurricane, just like all the others. It's big, it's nasty, it dumps a lot of water, and all those areas that you know are going to flood. And then everybody screams bloody murder. I think it's horrible. I don't want to diminish the suffering of people involved. They're going to have to rip out, walls and start stripping away the sheetrock on their houses, and it's going to be a mess. But I also got to say that, it's a hurricane, and Houstonians have experienced a number of hurricanes over the years. And this whole concept that the government is the new insurer for everything, I think is really debilitating. And that's the kind of coverage you just don't see, right?
And it's incredibly dangerous. The media, we know that they're going to sensationalize any natural disaster, no matter what it is, but what the media does not report about are the potential economic, social, and political perils of moral hazard theory. Now, one thing you've mentioned is that this incentivizes free riders building in floodplains who say, well, I'm not going to pay for costly flood insurance because if a real big storm comes along, I know the government's going to bail me out anyway. So why would anyone participate in the private flood insurance market?
Right, exactly. And people, these kinds of disasters are nature's way of signaling the cost of living in certain places, right? New Orleans, everybody and his mother knew that New Orleans was doomed. It was built below a river, right?
What could possibly go wrong?
The Army Corps of Engineers, we knew that they were diverting money. They've been calling for, improving that dike system for decades, right? I think you could say the same thing about Houston. There are some levees there to the west of town that I never saw water in, and they're apparently topping. So people are going to get some water in their houses. I lived in Briar Grove, which is right in West Houston. It's just inside the 610 loop, and we have flood insurance. And this is kind of analogous to the immigration issue. I remember paying a lot of money for residency and immigration, these visas that my ex-wife had to get, that cost me a lot of money. And I see people who are free riders just by stepping over the border, it doesn't cost them a penny. That's the part that's infuriating, right? You pay for flood insurance all your life, and then you find out everybody gets bailed out by the government. We see this in the Mississippi River Valley. We see this up and down the coast of Florida, Texas, South Carolina. This is really not an astonishing event. It shouldn't be surprising to anyone, and I really think that the coverage should focus on the real meaning here, which is people are building where they should not be building, at least not without insurance, right?
It as wonderful as it is to live in coastal areas, clearly there are risks associated with that, much more so on our southern coastal areas, and specifically our South Atlantic coastal areas, than anywhere else. So obviously people need to take this into consideration. So Steven Mnuchin is talking about this congressional relief package for Texas and tying it to raising the debt limit. What is your take on that?
Well, I mean, it's completely predictable, right? I think I saw two interviews this weekend, one with Mnuchin and then someone who objected. And, he took advantage of the situation to politicize charity. And basically said we can't get the money to the Houstonians if we don't raise the debt ceiling. So here we go. The government is just a huge scam which claims to be an insurance agency, and we all know it's not, right? So my only reaction to this is precisely the aspect of the Trump administration that is so disappointing to conservatives and classical liberals and constitutionalists and I would think libertarians in a big way. Here he is on display, the populist, the economic nationalist, and he walks right into it, right? You can't blame him. It's probably a political opportunity on some level for him, right? This area is going to recover very quickly, and he's going to look like a big hero. I would just point out that this is precisely how Hoover got started. He conducted this big rescue operation of, I believe it was Mississippi River that flooded, and this whole way of reacting to these kinds of natural disasters conditions people to expect governmental assistance in just about every circumstance.
And if it just is a sign of the times of how far we've drifted from the original interpretation of the Constitution. I was recently reading about Grover Cleveland's response in the late 19th century to a situation very similar like this, and he said in a national address, "I wish I could help these people, I really do, I wish I could, but there's nothing in the Constitution that says that I can tax some to spread the money around to people who have been victims of natural disasters." And it sounds harsh, but I think on a constitutional basis, that is completely sound.
Yeah, but this is the same as it ever was, right? This is Bastiat's basic lesson that when government turns into a process by which people vote themselves the largesse of others, or Sumner's complaint about the forgotten man, right? Which you've heard Trump allude to on a number of occasions, but apparently it's not the forgotten man who pays more than he receives. It's, again, a targeted special interest group. Anyway, it's incentivizing people to live in floodplains and not buy insurance. It's distorting a pricing mechanism by these natural disasters that are telling you how much it costs to live in certain areas. And it's, I think, destructive long term. It does create this notion that government is the new charity, and it's what got us Obamacare. It's what has gotten us this exponential growth in governmental agencies since the New Deal. So it's more the same. I feel for the people that are there. I hope they get help. I'm not discouraging charity. I would highly recommend that people donate through institutions like Walmart or HEB, which I think can be counted on to get money to the people who need it. A lot of these, even private charities, the ones that you see most allied with the government, not coincidentally, I would say, the Red Cross, these agencies that have branding involved, right? That you're not getting much of your money to the people who need it.
I mean, it's like in 2011, 2012, the Haiti disaster relief. I mean, these charities, like you said, are an industry, and they have so much overhead often, and oftentimes, you really need transparency with them, because how many cents in your dollar are actually going to help people, and how many of them are going to staffing and bureaucracy and travel? And we just saw this at the World Health Organization. They're spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year on travel, much of it first class, when they're supposed to be helping the most needy people in underdeveloped countries.
Right. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it really is a matter of scale. Again, if you want to give money to people in Houston, you would be better off giving to the grocery store, HEB, which is there in that area. The family that started that business is from the Corpus area. That kind of charity, which is local, it's relatively autonomous, it's horizontal, it's moving through the society between people who know each other. That's way more efficient than anything that comes out of DC. So
on it,
I hate to be the bearer of bad news, grumpy conservative Uncle Eric, but this area.
We do end up in that role a lot, huh? It isn't any fun to be the bearer of bad news. Or
the older I get, the more I just shake my head and try to tell people how it really is. This is a resilient area. Whole Foods, Texas Instruments, huge oil and gas industry, biotechnology, higher education. Trump's not gambling here. He's showing up. He's pretending that he has something to do with the recovery, and he's also playing a political game. I hope the listeners in the American region who may not be as familiar with American politics understand that when he starts connecting this relief to the disaster in Houston to the raising of the debt limit, he's politicizing it.
Well, sadly, in continuing with 16 years of his predecessor's policies that classical liberals are always bemoaning, we went from around 6 or 7 trillion in national debt to over 20 trillion after 16 years of Bush and Obama. It's really frightening.
Right.
And it's
right, and you listen to the governor of Texas saying, we're going to need 3 times what they needed for Katrina. Again, sympathy needs to be distinguished from rational economic planning and preparation. This just keeps growing. It's just another excuse, right? I believe this ratcheting effect. The government only grows, right? Every excuse it can find. And Trump clearly, again, politically, he learned the lesson of Katrina, which is you got to get involved and throw everything the federal government has at it.
And be hands-on.
Citizens, right? Ultimately, it's the citizens. It's we who elect these kinds of people who respond in this way, and it's we who expect now for the government to be there for us always, right? It's pivoting. More than a nanny state. I could get away from my nanny occasionally.
Yeah. You mentioned the term economic nationalism a few minutes ago, and perhaps we could just pivot towards that a bit. Now that, Trump, it seems, does not really have a very well-defined ideology. He seems to be kind of represent whatever ideology the advisors around him are advocating for. Do you think now that, say, Steve Bannon is out of the White House, who was kind of the big proponent of this economic nationalism that is really not classical liberalism in any way, shape, or form, do you think that there's going to be some room for improvement now?
Wow. We're probably getting out of my pay scale. My sense is that there really aren't that many conservatives around Trump to begin with. He's a former Democrat. A lot of his family are Democrats. He likes to be liked. Trump really wants people to like him. So I wouldn't look to Trump for limited government. That said, if we want to be political, he has reined in the EPA to some extent. He has
cut regulations.
What's that?
Cut regulations.
He's cut regulations. He's weakened enforcement. He's sort of played the anti-card that Obama played with this sort of extra governmental agency stuff. He's going to propose a tax policy here, so that may be very positive. But he just keeps, pumping up the bubble. In that sense, he's not really different from the Bushes, who despise him.
Yeah, it is.
But it's the same game.
There's clearly never been... this is just so unprecedented. I mean, I wouldn't have thought in 100 years we'd see something like this, such a divide. And it's not... Trump's supporters, plenty of them are Republicans, but plenty of them were just completely apolitical, or even Democrats or independents before Trump showed up on the scene. He's right. The anti-politician. He's not like a politician at all, for better or for worse.
I think in that sense, you say he doesn't have an ideological bone. That's good and bad, right? It's bad because he's not really curious about why libertarians feel the way they do about governmental intervention, or what it means to try and regulate an economy, right? But sure. On the other hand, he's not ideological in the sense that that people are experiencing ideology of late, which is all this race-baiting, holier-than-thou, political correct crap, frankly. So his response to all of that, I think, personally, is brilliant. I mean, it's just, he speaks truth to power in those circumstances. He really does call out the media as liars. He calls out the academic left for what it is, self-hating, even anti-Americanism. And he's direct about it and explicit, and I think that really impresses people. So that's a phenomenon. It's probably important on some level, but yeah, I think policy-wise, we should not be too. We should not allow ourselves to be too enthralled.
Sure. Just as a final question here to wrap it up, you know the area pretty well. What is your prognosis for in terms of a timetable, and where is the flooding at this point, and what are the recovery efforts going to look like, say, 3 months from now, 6 months, a year from now, and so on?
I'm not an expert on these events either. I know those dams, those dikes to the west of Houston, the Addicks Dam, and I can't remember the name of the other. There's a couple of reservoirs, the Barker and the Addicks reservoirs, that are topping. So that bayou that goes right through Houston from west to east is going to continue to swell, and that means places in western Houston are going to get flooded. That usually don't. So it's bigger. It's a however many year event. But those areas, people should not be surprised. Those are low-lying areas. They always flood in these events. So I would just, reiterate that. It's going to take a few days for them to figure out how high that water needs to go in that western bayou, western part of Houston. And then people will start drying out, and it'll be years of recovery. But there have been hurricanes before and tornadoes, and they always recover, right?
By all means. We've been speaking with Dr. Eric Graf from the University of Francisco Marroquin about the recent massive flooding in the Houston area. Eric, thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.